It's time now for our business update with Stephen Carroll. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, James.
Now, you're starting with that clash between Facebook and the Australian authorities. Tell us more about what's going on in that clash.
One of the main goals of that digital code that the Australian government has been putting through Parliament is to get to get tech giants to pay news organisations for their journalism. So I've been taking a look at the state of the Australian news market as a result. It's been a terrible few years for the news media in Australia. The Public Interest Journalism Initiative says that since January 2019, 120 newsrooms across Australia have closed. That includes consolidation, but also some titles being shut down. The tracking project says that this is a triple whammy causing this effect. Part of it is the influence of digital giants and how much of the advertising market they take, but also the coronavirus pandemic and even the bushfires affecting the media system there as well. Media ownership in Australia has in recent years become concentrated in a very small number of groups. One of the biggest players is Rupert Murdoch's News Corp. In the year to the end of June, ad revenue for its Australian business was down by 31%. Seven West Media, which owns the 7 TV channels and newspapers like West Australia, saw its revenues fall by 14% in its last financial year, and Nine Entertainment, which owns the 9 TV channels but also titles like the Sydney Morning Herald, its revenues also down by 7%.
And how much of that, Stephen, is to do with the impact of digital platforms on the advertising market?
Media companies have long complained that tech giants are taking the lion's share of digital advertising revenue. And in drafting Australia's new tech codes, the country's Competition Commission looked at where the money spent on digital advertising actually goes. It found that for every $100, 53 of them go to Google, 28 to Facebook, and the rest, the $19, is shared amongst all the other media companies and advertisers out there. So the deals that these big media companies have signed with Google will help to offset some of those losses that they've experienced in this digital ads market. According to estimates by JP Morgan, Seven West could receive $40 to $70 million from the internet giant, whereas Nine's deal with Google is reported to be worth around $30 million a year.
OK, and next to news of more job cuts and big losses at Air France-KLM. Tell us about
That's right. The airline has said that it expects to cut 6,000 more jobs in the coming years as it counts the cost of the pandemic. That's on top of the more than 8,000 jobs that it axed in 2020, the equivalent of 10% of its global workforce. Air France-KLM saw losses of €7.1 billion last year. Yuka Roye has the story.
As air travel remains at a virtual standstill, Air France-KLM is in deep financial trouble. The group carried just over 34,000 passengers worldwide in 2020, down 2/3 from the previous year. Revenue dropped 60% to €9.2 billion, plunging the airline giant into a staggering €7.1 billion loss. The company cut 8,700 jobs in 2020. That's 10% of its workforce. But that's not enough to bring down costs. It expects to cut 6,000 more jobs over the coming years.
2020 tested the Air France-KLM group with the most severe crisis ever experienced by the air transport industry. I would like to thank our employees for their dedication and tremendous flexibility during this period, which has allowed us to remain resilient despite an unprecedented drop in traffic.
The group received a €9 billion lifeline from the French and Dutch governments last April. It's now poised for another round of bailout to stay afloat, as it burned through €5.7 billion in cash over the course of the year, more than a third of that in the final quarter. The silver lining came from the cargo business, where revenues increased. Passenger numbers are not expected to pick up anytime soon. The company hopes that global vaccination campaigns will help increase air travel in the second half of the year.
Now, another company that had a very bad year in 2020 was Airbus. The aerospace giant says it's facing the most severe crisis ever in the industry. The company saw net losses of €1.1 billion last year. Revenues were down by almost a third. Airbus says it doesn't expect deliveries of planes to increase in 2021. Recovery in air travel is expected to be slow. From Airbus headquarters, our correspondent Chris Bachman sent us this report.
While thousands of aircraft remain grounded across the globe, Airbus has seen pilot flight training on its simulators pick up worldwide recently. It's now at 70% of pre-pandemic levels.
We can see some signs of improvement, mainly in countries where the internal flights are doing a lot of activity by themselves, like China or India. Within Airbus, we expect to be back to the normal activity between 23 and 25.
In this factory, Airbus makes pylons that basically get attached to the wings. Now, production has fallen between 30 and 40% because of the pandemic. But nevertheless, the company has an order book of at least 7 to 8 years, and it believes that eventually airlines will need their planes, and therefore it has to have the workforce ready for when things do improve.
This is the Airbus-owned and operated lycée in Toulouse, where pupils between the ages of 15 and 18 learn the mechanical and technical skills that before COVID provided a 95% chance of a full-time job on the assembly lines at the end. The school spends a lot of time reassuring the students that their newly acquired skills will be needed again soon.
I trust in the future. I trust also with the health context, with the vaccine, and probably the situation will be better, and we hope we could travel all around the world very soon.
Repairing the damage to the industry may take time. In the past year, between plane makers and suppliers, 30,000 jobs have been lost in the French aerospace sector. That's around 15% of the total workforce.
Let's take a look at what's happening on the markets next for you. Airbus shares down 3% in Paris as investors digest the detail of those company results. Air France shares down around 1% too. More broadly on the European markets, it's a mixed picture. London and Paris in the red, some small gains in Frankfurt. The DAX up there by 0.1%.
And finally, Stephen, despite the global economic crisis, property prices in Hong Kong have hit a new record.
A 5-bedroom apartment in the city has sold for the equivalent of a record-breaking €156,000 per square metre. The property is in the sought-after mid-levels area of the city. Now, the total price paid is €49 million. It's not an outright record, but the price per square metre is. All of this in spite of Hong Kong's economy slumping by 6% last year. Unemployment in the city is at its highest level in 16 years. But there are some people who still have plenty of money to spend on their apartments.
Well, empathy from the city of Paris, from expensive property prices. Thanks for that, Stephen. Quick break now, and coming up in the next half hour, we'll have French Connections with Florence Villeminot on set. She'll be looking at the sensitive issue of age of consent here in France.